Steph Curry is not ruling out a Kevin Durant trade just yet, and neither is Brian Windhorst. Danny Ainge has some pretty harsh comments about what used to be the Utah Jazz, and we'll get you caught up on what's going on in Eurobasket. All that and more on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us, making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where you can join the show and catch a video version of it if you turn on the old subscribes. Thanks for joining us wherever you may be and making us part of your week. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer over at the Action Network and host of a podcast called Buckets and co-host of a podcast called Locked On Nuggets. Joining me is Tony East, writer of all things Indiana. He can follow his work over at T East NBA over on the old Twitters, and catch his podcast Locked On Pacers for all of your Tyrese Halliburton fan fiction, as he is one of the most, I think, beloved players going into this NBA season, which is just, Tony, we are 2 weeks away from Media Day as we record this on a Monday night. Just 2 weeks away from the season getting ramped up again. I'm excited, but we do have some news to break down today, as in a Rolling Stone interview, Steph Curry was asked, important, didn't bring it up, this always kind of thing, he was asked about his thoughts on if he would accept like Kevin Durant back on the Warriors. And his response, hell yeah. The summation of this is just basically that Curry doesn't still have an issue with Durant. Like, there was never really an issue there. Those guys got along. Kerr, maybe. Draymond, yeah, a little bit of tension. But I don't think Steph Curry and Kevin Durant ever had problems, and Curry won 2 championships with them. So I'm not surprised that Steph is still open to the idea of Kevin Durant landing with the Warriors.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy for Steph, currently at the top of the pedestal of the league, finals MVP, champ once again, made it back to the mountaintop after a few down years, to say, yeah, heck yeah, man. I kind of proved that I'm the dude again. I'm cool with having KD back. And yeah, I agree with you that I think it's noteworthy that he said, the idea of playing with KD and knowing who he is as a person from our history in those 3 years, I think KD's a really good dude. I love that dude. That's great. Obviously, I think that you're right that a couple other players maybe didn't have the tightest relationship with KD as he exited and ultimately went to Brooklyn, of course. But the fact that Steph, one of the best to ever do it, and currently potentially the top of the pedestal in the entire league, depending on how you view how last season ended, to say that it is pretty interesting. And KD, who knows what's going to happen with him? He rescinded his trade request, but perhaps this is something the Warriors, who still have a ton of interesting young talent and flotsam salary, could explore at some point.
Yeah, Brian Windhorst on NBA Today did actually say he's not sure that Kevin Durant will keep that trade demand in the closet. Now, Brian, not being a big fan of the old aggregation, would want to note that it wasn't like he was reporting that Durant's not keeping it in the closet or that Durant is actively going to return. He's just basically talking about how unstable. I'll say this, if Windhorst thinks it's possible, it's notable because most times the biggest reporters in the industry will know pretty convincingly what things are on and off the table. Like Zach Lowe says the Lakers are not trading Anthony Davis. That's a pretty good indication that's not going to happen. So Windhorst, I think, saying it's at least possible that he goes the other way. And this is the whole question, I think, for everyone. And this is what's going to make a lot of these preseason prognostications about the Eastern Conference really messy, Tony, is how do you possibly try and predict what's going to go on with the Nets when you don't know if how unstable this has been over the last year and a half, honestly, is going to get sorted out. Like, this doesn't seem like anything close to a normal basketball team at this point still.
Yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all. I said this to you before we started recording. I think I've said this on Locked On NBA many times before because KD has dominated the storylines. But this just reminds me so much of James Harden's Houston exit, right? Where Russ gets traded the summer before. Harden reportedly wants out as they head into the season, but they keep him. Look, we got John Wall. We're going to be okay. And James Harden's like, no, we're not. And it only took him 12 games of not trying at all to go, hey, this sucks. What did he say? The situation's crazy. We can't fix it. Something like that. in a very obvious please trade me now press conference, right? I don't think Kevin Durant will go that pointed, although maybe he will. But it's always felt like a situation where unless the Nets come into the season and Katie and Kyrie are awesome together and their offseason looks great and this team is clicking, like it sure seems like he could turn back around and start causing some problems as the season starts if he really wants to get out or wants to force the Nets' hand. Like, sure, it's kumbaya right now, but you never know how these things can go. And James Harden, it was an effective strategy for him. He got where he wanted to go, and then he got where he wanted to go again. Or maybe Kevin Durant can take a page out of that playbook. If he wants to play with Steph, I don't know that he does or doesn't, but if he does, hey, that's an option. It's still something he can consider. And Windhorst always very careful with his wording because he does know things that he wants to share but can't necessarily in some cases. So I think he chose the wording carefully, and I think it's very possible that Kevin Durant does turn around and open this conversation back up, and the Warriors are well suited to be one of the teams that have interest in him, I think.
Yeah, I think the question there is Durant basically got to choose how he played in Brooklyn, who he played with, how he played with. Does he want to go back to Kerr? I think is a big question because it seemed like they had a lot of tension points along the way. The honestly, part of me kind of admires the Warriors for this because it does seem like they don't need him. They've kind of proven that conclusively. They told that to him when he was there, and then they went a title without him. So they've pretty much proven that conclusively. It honestly does seem like they would trade for Kevin Durant just because it makes everyone else so miserable. And I respect that type of pettiness. Just no one in the world wants to see Durant back with the Warriors. No one. I'm not even sure their own fans want to see that. And just to do it, to be like, yeah, no, we're going to do it. We're just going to win everything. And we're going to shut down the league for another 2 years. Good luck. That's I appreciate that level of pettiness.
Yeah, I mean, they drafted Wiseman. Number 2, Moody looks good. Kuminga looks good. Like, Wiggins was an all-star last year. Like, they've got the stuff to do it if they want to do it. 2 down years with good lottery luck and a great D'Angelo Russell trade really set up the Warriors pretty well to kind of get back at us. How ironic would it be if a pick they got trading away Kevin Durant to the Nets ended up being very integral in getting Kevin Durant back to the Warriors all these years later? But yeah, they're uniquely set up. But I think part of the allure of the Warriors is, I think Sam Esfandiari, who covers Golden State's, kind of alluded to this a few times very well, is like they drafted Steph, they drafted Clay, they drafted Draymond. So all these fans got to grow up with the team. And yeah, they signed KD, they didn't trade for him. Like, all the core pieces were around for all their growth for the dynasty, and that's awesome for fans. I think trading away even some of that to get Kevin Durant would not be as fun, even if they would go on this crazy run of 5-6 titles in so many years. So yeah, I'm sure they'll consider it. It's Kevin Durant. He's one of the best players of all time, but it's obviously different when he played for the franchise before. There's still unique relationships with a lot of the parties involved, and they have young talent that could lead them to a different dynasty potentially if they don't do it.
Well, when we talk about the opposite of dynasties, I think you got to talk about what's currently the slow downfall of the Utah Jazz. And executive Danny Ainge, president of basketball operations, had some pretty pointed comments to say in his first comments since all of the trades went down. We'll talk about that next when we come back on Locked On NBA. But first, I need to tell you about BetOnline, your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Have myself a great weekend. Bet Texas plus 20.5 because Nick Saban is not great after covering his first game in the opener in that second game. So went ahead and grabbed Texas plus 20.5. That one covered easily. Had myself the Steelers in several bets. Great win there. Great to have football back. Great to have football betting back, especially. And you can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games at BetOnline, your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in all your favorite sports and events like MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. And you can get in all those NBA over-unders. I love the Kings over this year. It's my number one bet. Is the Kings over 33.5. What could possibly go wrong? Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic, not even on this promo. Which NBA player moves the betting lines the most this season? Locked On and the BetOnline odds makers present the NBA Top 50 most valuable players starting on September 19th. Find it on Locked On NBA, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Back here with Tony East, I'm Matt Moore. Thanks for joining us on Locked On NBA. Tony, Danny Ainge had himself some comments today, met with the media, and had himself some comments that were illuminative as far as his thought process when trading both Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell in the same preseason. I will start you off with this one. Quote, "What I saw during the season was a group of players that really didn't believe in each other," Ainge told reporters in a news conference on Monday. "Like the whole group, I think they liked each other even more than what was reported, but I'm not sure there was a belief. When we got to the playoffs, I thought, well, this is a team that has had some disappointing playoffs, so I thought maybe they're just waiting for the playoffs. I gave them that benefit of the doubt, but it was clear this team didn't perform well in the playoffs again." So this gets into, I think, a core question of what the problem was, because this team won the most games in the league in 2021. They had the best net rating in the league. They've been a perennial 50-win team. They've been really good. They finished with a 5th seed this season. Very well could have won that first round series versus the Mavericks with Luka Doncic out to start the series. It looked like they were going to after they won game 1. And it all kind of fell apart. What do you make of Ainge's comments about a lack of belief in each other and not necessarily disliking each other being the problem?
You know what makes this the most interesting to me is that Ainge hasn't been with the Jazz for that long. The fact that he can parachute in, and Justin Zanuck, their GM, is quoted in the story as well, which is equally illuminating because he has been around for a while. But the fact that Ainge, an outsider, can come in, be with this franchise for, I think, less than a full calendar year still to this day, right? And go, oh, man, those guys don't believe in each other. You know, that they had a very talented team, like you said, winning 50 games every year. But very rarely did anyone around the league think the Jazz were ever this true title threat, because they had these sort of random lumps where they would be rolling in the regular season and it would just randomly end. And then in the playoffs, it's kind of the same deal. Conley's 3 rolls off in the bubble. That was probably their best chance, but they never fully clicked when it mattered. And it always felt like there was something missing. And maybe it was this chemistry element. And there was always some reporting about, Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert's relationship. There were other talented players on that team that obviously mattered, but those two guys being the face, that always sends ripples through your team at some point as well. So I don't think it's surprising at all. And I think the most illuminating part, again, is Danny Ainge, who's been there for not very long, can come in and go, okay, something's not right chemistry-wise, even if we do have a pretty talented and well-constructed team.
I think it's weird in the retrospect to look at the Gobert-Mitchell relationship. So when you talk about trust, to put this in very basketball terms, they didn't trust Gobert. They didn't
At all.
He would be open under the basket on switches whenever the teams would go small, and they simply wouldn't feed him. They wouldn't give him the ball because they did not trust him to convert at-rim attempts, post-ups, just turnaround shots, whatever. And it wasn't just Mitchell, but Mitchell, I think, was the most egregious. I thought Mitchell, as he progressed in his time with the Jazz, especially after the whole conflict after COVID, it seemed to me like Mitchell became less and less interested in boosting Gobert. And so the question then is like, okay, so Mitchell didn't trust one of his teammates and Mitchell tried to do too much. So you didn't think that you could just trade Mitchell and get return. And I think that's the problem, is a team with Gobert and the pieces they had still needed an engine. And so if the engine wasn't going to work with the parts, their best value was to trade the parts and then the engine. And that's, I think, pretty interesting in how that all played out. I think it's hard to blame Ainge or Zanuck from looking at it and just saying, I honestly, I'm impressed with them. I said this from the start. I'm impressed with them for trading both of them, because my understanding was that ownership was very heavily preferential to keeping Mitchell. But they thought Mitchell was a superstar and they didn't want to give him up, and it was good for any number of reasons, including franchise valuation, ticket sales, and everything else. And so to really kind of realize, like, we're not winning a championship with this team. This team is not winning a championship, and that most likely after trading Gobert, you're not going to win enough games, and Mitchell's going to ask out anyway. Like, I do wonder how much of this was, I really want to know what the thought process was in terms of the sequential order of how those guys got traded. Was it, because the way it's been presented is they traded Gobert, they were thinking about keeping Mitchell, and then they tried to trade Mitchell. I wonder very much if it was kind of the opposite. Like, they kind of realized, like, look, Mitchell's going to leave anyway. We're going to have to trade him. He's going to ask out. He's going to want to go to New York or wherever else. We're going to have to trade him. If we try and trade the rest of the pieces after we trade Mitchell, our leverage is compromised. And so trading Gobert at this point gets us the most return, potentially say, 7 draft picks. And so getting that kind of return, I'm very curious to know what the sequential order was choosing between those two guys based off of that relationship and dynamic.
There's a ton of fascinating layers to how this shook out because, like I've already said, Ainge is a new CEO. Also, their ownership is new, right? Smith just got this team, pays the tax, and then they're blowing it up. The All-Star Game's in Utah this coming season, right? Some discussion was like, hey, they want to have a dude representing their city in their city. And like that has value to these franchises. So all of that made me think they wouldn't go this route. But at the same time, they traded Gobert, and they didn't trade Gobert for like a bunch of pesky vets, that could help Donovan Mitchell. It's like, we got all young players, and like they got some vets. I don't want to be like, oh, Malik Beasley and Patrick Beverley were in the trade, but like they got picks. They got a team that would be bad around Donovan Mitchell. So that kind of, like you alluded to, kind of forced their hand. But also Woj reported, right, that the Knicks offered Mitchell originally included Mitchell Robinson, which was like day one of free agency. So I think it was sort of simultaneous overtures from other teams, and the Jazz had to figure out what they thought the best order of operations was. Do they actually want to go this route? Does it make sense? And so the fact that Ainge and a new ownership group committed to that is very fascinating to me in the order. And like I talked about, Zanuck has been there for a long time. And something he said in the presser today was this is from ESPN, talked about that it wasn't something that was just this year sputtering out was the factor. And this is sort of known, they haven't had great postseason success, but Zanuck said previous results kind of told us who we were. It wasn't just a 1 year thing. This was a good 3-year period where we won a lot of games and had a lot of success, but we were tapped out from a potential standpoint, and we needed to reset that. I think I agree with that. That they had the good team, but it just never got them anywhere. And so a bunch of new parties, I understand wanting to think, okay, we can make this better. But if the guy who's been there the longest says, no, we can't, and they get good offers for both of them, I think they might have played this pretty well.
David Locke, founder of the Locked On Podcast Network and host of Locked On Jazz, has talked about how really the turning point was that bubble run, the collapse, the 3-1 collapse to Denver.
That team was good.
Is kind of looked at as like the turning point of, if you can't win that series, if you can't deal with that adversity, if you can't get to that point. So when they talk about these previous failures, and like I think the following year wasn't necessarily awesome when they had the number 1 seed and they lost.
The loss was pretty rough.
The Clippers without Kawhi.
Yeah.
Like, you get to a point where you're just like, this is just not going to happen for us. And I think it's tough to decide between it's not going to happen for us or we need to stick with what the Mavs did, right? Which is you had in the back in the day, you had Dirk and Jet and Josh Howard, and then you trade Josh Howard and you bring in Jason Kidd and you stick with Jet and Dirk Nowitzki, but you change all the other pieces around him and you get there. And like that's like the happy ending, but most often it ends kind of like this where ultimately there just isn't enough kind of support structure there. Final thing on this. Do you blame anybody for this? I guess, do you blame anybody more than anybody else for this? Do you blame coaching or Gobert or Mitchell, like for the fall of a team that really did have serious title aspirations and was good enough in a basketball sense to win a title, whether the matchups were going to be there or not? It was a really talented team. Do you blame anybody at the end of this, or is this just one of those things?
Yeah, I struggle to blame anyone because when I look back on the Jazz's playoff failures, I struggle to pick one player that I'm like, they were always coming up short in the postseason. And Quinn Snyder, it seems like, made mostly good decisions. Gobert, I think people talk about him getting played off the court, and I guess, but most of the time it's just like he can't cover for everybody, and his perimeter defenders are getting beat all the time. So like I think everybody was complicit to some extent in this. And a lot of times when that's the case, people will point to management and say, oh, well, maybe they traded too much for Mike Conley, or maybe they didn't, draft well in the process. And like, yeah, a lot of those things are true, but like every key player involved, both of the stars, coaching, management, all made, I would say, pretty similar level or number of missteps along the way. And it's just one of those things that happens. You can't make too many mistakes, and they made one too many mistakes.
I have a hot take.
Oh.
I'm pretty analytics forward. Love analytics. I use them in every piece of writing that I do. It dives in every piece of analysis that I do. I try and find the nexus between like watching the games and clips and possessions, and then also the numbers. And to me, you need both of them in order to have a real complete view. I blame advanced analytics. And the reason I blame advanced analytics is that it started becoming this thing with Gobert where he is the most impactful player in basketball, or he's a top 5 impactful player on offense. And like he was built up so much as like this legendary player, when I think Donovan Mitchell's sitting there going, I have to do everything because this dude can't make a hook shot. Now, what happened then I do think was that there was a little bit of tension in terms of like the star power stuff, because it wasn't fully Donovan's team. It was still like Rudy was there first, and Rudy was like and everyone loved Rudy because Rudy was like the guy. And he was all these types of things. And the problem then became, I think, Mitchell. Like I blame Mitchell as well, because Mitchell reacted, I think, to that attention by not becoming a guy that lifts up everybody else and tries to be the guy in the bubble that just scored 50 every game. And when he started becoming less of a playmaker, that inherently lowers your ability to keep Gobert on the floor in these tough playoff situations. And it's just this cascading really, where they brought in more offense to make up for Rudy's limitations offensively. That really was part of it. It was like the Rocket series where we need more shooting so that this doesn't have to be, Rudy doesn't have to score. But then when you brought in more offensive weapons, you lost the perimeter defense. And then Mitchell's defensive lapses become more established. Like, I think Mitchell deserves a huge chunk of the blame because I'm a big Mitchell guy and he got worse the last 2 years. But ultimately it starts, Tony, with those darn analytics overrating Rudy Gobert.
Hey, once again, analytics measure how impactful you are in your role. It doesn't measure how impactful your role is. That's kind of hard to say and rationalize, but once you figure it out, it's like Rudy Gobert was awesome in his role, but his role might not have been more important than the guy creating all the shots and all the points.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Eurobasket, where Rudy Gobert is actually still in play, but a two-time MVP is no longer. Plus, I'll ask Tony the question of, do you want your stars going deep in Eurobasket? We'll do that when we come back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA, thanks for joining us, making us part of your day. I'm Matt Moore alongside Tony East, breaking down all things NBA offseason with you. Eurobasket continues overseas, but it'll continue without the number one seed and the two-time MVP. Nikola Jokic and Serbia went down on Sunday to Italy behind a barrage of three-pointers. Nikola Jokic finished plus 11. They were minus 19 in the 11 minutes that Nikola Jokic sat. So a familiar scene from last season in Denver for Joker. Serbia's perimeter defense was horrible. Nikola Melli, who used to play for the Pelicans and then got traded to the Mavericks and then basically left. He was awesome. He was fantastic. He made a series of plays on Jokic, including blocking his fadeaway, disrupting the post-entry passes, big shots. Fontecchio, who plays for the Jazz this season, he was awesome as well. Awesome. Really spirited, impressive performance from Italy, but a real shocker. But, Tony, I want to ask you this question, because Luka Doncic missed practice on Monday as he gets ready for the semifinals with Slovenia. Zoran Dragic is out for the remainder of the tournament. Luka missed with an ankle injury. So he's already got, an ankle tweak. And look, this is basketball. Guys get ankle problems all the time. I don't necessarily freak out about it. But if you're an NBA fan, how do you measure wanting guys to succeed versus the fear of them starting off the season, A, tired, and B, banged up? Because Luka's had some other issues. He's had, like, Giannis is dealing with a back problem. Luka's been banged up a little bit and then a couple of ways. Training camp is 2 weeks away, and they can rest those guys for training camp and into the preseason. But, we're only a month away from the start of the season, really, as we sit here on September 12th as we record this. Like, we're a month and a week away. So how do you balance wanting? I think there's value to what guys can accomplish in riding that momentum, but I do think that there's got to be a little bit of apprehension for both NBA teams, executives, and coaches watching these games, as well as fans, knowing that so much of their seasons ride on these guys and they're playing this extra basketball.
Let's call the Celtics and ask how they feel about Gallo not being on their team this coming season as he plays in Eurobasket. I cover the Pacers. Paul George broke his leg playing for USA because of the stanchion, right? Like, I think that NBA teams know this is a reality they have to live with. They cannot prevent guys from playing for their country. I think Minnesota tried with Juancho, right? Was that what the rumor was last summer? I don't know if I ever got the full story there, but either way, you guys are going to play for their country. And so it can be a situation like, for example, with Luka, where now, unlike last year, or at least reportedly, he comes to the season in great shape. And that's awesome. But watching just this tournament where Goga Batadze hurts his ankle, and I've been watching a lot of Germany because Daniel Theis It's on the Pacers, and like I just saw Franz Wagner just come straight down on a Montenegro player, and he might not play in Germany's next game. It's like if you're the Magic, you're like crap. Like this stuff kind of sucks for NBA fans, but also these dudes love playing in these games. They love it. And so I think it's just sort of a reality. It's like what really separates this from Chet Holmgren getting hurt in, a pro-am, for example. It's like these dudes are going to play in something at some point. It's really hard to kind of govern what they can and can't play, especially because a lot of it's collectively bargained anyway. Hello, Cat. So, it's kind of impossible to avoid the injuries. And I think fans, it sucks if they don't care about the competitions necessarily, but it's sort of a reality they have to live with, that their favorite players are kind of putting their bodies in the lines. Like you said, Luka, Wagner, Batadze, Gallinari, like everybody's been banged up to some extent. They've got camp in 2.5 weeks.
Other guys that have been absolutely awesome in Eurobasket play. Lauri Markkanen for Finland. 43 the other day in an upset of Croatia. He's been absolutely phenomenal.
Jazz get the best player in the trade, man. That's what I'm hearing.
There you go. I appreciate you bringing up that you've been following Tice so that I can remember where Daniel Tice is after so many deals and trades and moves. So Daniel Tice is there. Wagner, I hope Wagner's okay because he's been so freaking good. I'm very excited for the Magic, and he's a big reason why. So I think there is this kind of balance. But yeah, like a lot of this, there's not just excitement and passion. There's expectation and pressure for these guys to play too.
Yep.
And that has to be balanced as well.
Especially for like the German players, it's in Berlin, and like Goga plays for the Pacers. I know I've mentioned him several times, and most listeners may not know about him too well, but Georgia was a host city or a host country for the first time ever, right? Like this was a huge Eurobasket for them, even if they did awful. Like Goga's not going to miss that opportunity for his country, even if they didn't make it out of group stage. And if you're an NBA fan, like obviously, again, you'd prefer your favorite team do very well, but I think opening with Jokic losing is a big thing because there was a chance like the NBA would have been stoked that the final four teams could have been Gobert's France and Luka's Slovenia and Jokic's Serbia and Giannis's Greece. Like it is a loaded tournament, especially with Markkanen playing this well, and like Dennis Schroeder's playing really well. You could have had all these like star names. Like it's fun basketball, and that's something else that makes these dudes want to play. Is that the games are really competitive and really fun and entertaining. So not only is there national pride involved, it's good basketball. It's not just some random pickup run where they're not getting that much better or anything like that. It's really fantastic stuff. So it's kind of just a tough reality fans have to deal with. It sort of goes back to the Chet Holmgren thing I mentioned earlier. Like you just kind of got to live with it. Although this is a much higher and more impactful level than that, obviously.
Yeah. Giannis is back. I think is one to watch out for. I will say if Wagner is able to play, I think Germany makes a run. I really do. They've been really good. They've been really solid. They've had all the momentum since the group play. Like real run there. Slovenia has a walk now. With Serbia out, they're gonna cruise. They should cruise to the finals. If Slovenia does not make it to the final, to the gold medal game, it will be an epic disaster. It'll be
if AJ Slaughter, ex-Pistons Summer League and preseason superstar, keeps playing like this for Poland, maybe not. But they definitely have the easiest bracket left. Whereas on the top side, I guess, as I look at the Eurobasket page, like the Hernan Gomez brothers have been killing it for Spain. Garuba's been killing it for Spain. Markkanen's been killing it for Finland. Like that's a much tougher group. But whereas Luka, it seems like if he keeps playing like this, they're just gonna walk on by everybody.
All right, it's got to wrap it up for the Locked On NBA for a Tuesday. Thanks for joining us, making us part of your week. Really appreciate it. Check out tomorrow's show. Jake Madison, John Corrales will have you covered on whatever comes up in the offseason drama as we approach less than 2 weeks until the start of NBA training camp. Keep it here and subscribe. Give us those 5-star reviews. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On NBA.